To say that 2020 has been a terrible year would be to dramatically overstate the power in the word terrible. I'm sure I don't have to remind you of all the factors that caused this year to be one of the worst in recent history, since all you have to do is turn on the news to watch the madness unfold. Just to put in perspective how absurd the world has become, Tiger King was released on Netflix earlier this year, and the events that occurred in that documentary aren't even close to the craziest things that have happened this year. I bet you completely forgot about it until I brought it up just now. With the chaos that has become of this year, many have turned to comedy as a way to cope with their troubles. It's a concept that has been proven effective over and over throughout history. Sometimes we have to laugh so we don't cry. If there's one show that embodies this philosophy more than any other, it's South Park. The show has become synonymous with this idea of using comedy to get through tough times, since it's arguably the premise of the entire show. The best example of this is back in 2001, the first episode of South Park after 9/11. It was exactly what the nation needed at the time, a reason to laugh when there are so many reasons to cry. Because of this, it's no wonder why the internet had such anticipation for South Park's 2020 season. The creators of the show remained quiet the whole year, and it wasn't until mid-September that the announcement was released for the first ever hour-long episode, the Pandemic Special. Though the trailer looked solid, it also raised many questions related to how the show would attack these issues. Many worried that the creators would hold back and that they'd play it safe and avoid making any real statements. As soon as the special aired, however, it quickly became clear that in typical South Park fashion, they were holding absolutely nothing back. So with the intro out of the way, let's get into it. How South Park's Pandemic Special made us laugh through the pain. As usual, the effectiveness of the humor in this episode is thanks to the clever ways the writers satirize relevant topics. The episode begins with Randy calling a town meeting to advertise his new Pandemic Special, a discount on his marijuana specifically for the pandemic. He also discusses how his sales have increased substantially since the pandemic started, making him lots of money while everyone else has fallen into financial hardship thanks to the closure of the nation.
People have lost their businesses, lost their livelihoods. I also own a small business. I sell weed. And I have to say, I'm actually doing pretty good. Amazing, really. Integrity Farms weed has seen a 400% increase in sales since the shutdown in March.
Immediately, it's clear that the creators are making a statement on those who have profited majorly thanks to this pandemic. People like Jeff Bezos, who has reportedly made over $700 billion since the pandemic began. Later, when Randy is watching the news, he learns that the pandemic was actually started because of human contact with a bat. This triggers a flashback in which Randy recalls traveling to China with Mickey Mouse, Mickey being symbolism for Disney's continual compliance with the Chinese censors in order to make money off the Chinese audience. This was a major plotline back in season 23. Anyways, while there, it appears that Randy and Mickey may have partied a little too hard, leading Randy to do some horrible things to a poor bat. This gives Randy the realization that he is the cause of the pandemic. And when he later learns that the animal that started the pandemic wasn't actually a bat, he has a brief moment of relief. That is, until he learns that the animal that started the pandemic was a pangolin, which of course he did the same thing to. Fans of South Park know that a large chunk of the show's comedy comes from absurdist humor that makes little sense in context or utilizes hyperbole to such a degree that it is hardly even related to the original topic. It's used effectively in South Park because it is often so unexpected that you can't help but laugh. I've seen when people review the newer seasons of South Park, this is a topic that's often brought up, with many arguing that it's much harder to use this concept successfully, since reality in a way has become a hyperbole of itself. These scenes alone do a lot to debunk this criticism, since making Randy patient zero of a worldwide pandemic thanks to his acts of bestiality with Mickey Mouse on a trip to China to try to expand his weed business, that's reaching into the upper boundaries of absurdity. The sheer ridiculousness of that series of events is honestly impressive from a writing standpoint, and combined with the fact that this wouldn't be particularly out of line for Randy's character is what makes the concept so hilarious.
It wasn't a bat. It wasn't a bat. It wasn't a bat in your face. In your face. It wasn't a bat.
When we tracked the virus, we found it did originate in Wuhan, but from a species called Folidota.
And what exactly is Folidota?
It's a pangolin, and here it is right over here.
What's a pangolin, Mom?
I'm not even sure. Do you know what a pangolin is, Randy? Randy?
When this episode aired, it actually had the highest rating South Park has seen since 2013. Not only did people tune in, it received very positive feedback from the general public. The reason I believe this episode received so much praise is because Matt and Trey knew what they should and shouldn't make fun of. They knew that there was really no way that they could make light of a virus that was causing as much destruction as it was. After all, there's nothing funny about the death toll that keeps increasing. So instead of making light of the virus itself, they made fun of the many ways people responded to the virus. And of course, in typical South Park fashion, they made sure that no group was off limits. For starters, there's Butters, who was promised a trip to Build-A-Bear as a reward for being a good boy at the dentist. All he wants to do is go make his own teddy bear, and as the time spent in lockdown keeps increasing, he gets angrier and angrier about the fact that he can't go.
March 16th. It was March 16th. That's how long it's been. It was supposed to be a party. A big happy gathering at Build-A-Bear to celebrate me being a big boy at the dentist. Then they shut it all down. They said I'd have to wait until April. And then it was May. And then they said wait until summer. It's fucking October now. Why doesn't anyone tell me the truth? That I'm never going to Build-A-Bear. That I'm never going ever again.
The humor in Butters' anger at not being able to go to Build-A-Bear comes from the relatability of the situation. Many of us had plans set for this year that involved public events or trips, things that we were really looking forward to. And with the virus putting all of that on hold for the time being, it's easy to become angry and frustrated, especially with no end in sight. Relatable humor works by making characters experience things that are familiar to the audience, and by doing so, it can allow the audience to laugh at something that otherwise would be a negative aspect of their life. So seeing Butters with the same feelings many of us are experiencing is cathartic in a sense. The same idea applies when the boys and parents have to use Zoom for school and meetings. These days, virtually every school or job that requires face-to-face conversation is using Zoom to substitute any form of real human contact. And watching the characters experience the troubles that come with it is very relatable for anyone that has had to use it. The glitches, forgetting to mute and unmute your mic, and finding ways to skip out on the call are all things that the vast majority of us have had to struggle through every day, and seeing it play out in the show makes for a hilarious sequence of events.
Okay, I just muted everybody, okay? Now if we don't get along, I'll just sit here with you all on mute.
Speaking of skipping out on Zoom calls, the show also tackles a rather uncommon response, that being Cartman's response to the pandemic. Cartman loves the world as it is now. Since he doesn't have to go to school and see any of his friends that he actually hates, he could skip school by faking computer issues and spend all day eating snacks and playing video games. It's the reality that he's always dreamed of. Cartman's response to the pandemic is a return to form for his character, in a sense, since Cartman hasn't been nearly as awful in the last few seasons as he's become known for. Cartman's character has always been the funniest of the main characters because of this, and watching him act like he always has is refreshing and as hilarious as ever.
Aaron, aren't you supposed to be on your Zoom call?
Stay away from me, man. Yeah, you got to keep your social distance.
Of course, you can't talk about the responses to the pandemic without mentioning the mask debate. South Park tackles this issue by parodying those who refuse to wear a mask. It starts with Mr. Stotch criticizing his neighbors for not wearing their masks over their nose, saying they're just chin diapers at that point. However, as the episode progresses, his view on the subject actually changes, and he begins to wear his mask in the chin diaper fashion. This is until Dr. Fauci calls a press conference and discusses that you do in fact have to wear the mask over your nose. Mr. Stotch reacts in the same way that you would expect any anti-masker to respond.
Are you out of your mind? You expect people to wear a diaper over their nose. That's disgusting. Fuck you, Fauci.
Eventually, the anti-maskers and mask wearers confront each other in the streets, and it leads to an all-out riot. Just simply making fun of anti-maskers would have been too easy for the South Park writers, since everyone has already made fun of them. Instead, they make fun of the thought process of the anti-maskers. The idea that they don't really care about wearing a mask or not. Rather, they care more about not being a sheep, not following the general public blindly. Simply making fun of anti-maskers is a little tired at this point, so by instead making fun of their thought process, they ended up creating a much more effective piece of satire. Then, of course, they target the person whose response arguably has the greatest impact on all of us, President Garrison. Now, normally South Park's commentary on a topic is rather subtle. Especially in the most recent seasons, it's easy to miss the point they're making if you aren't paying attention. The president was an exception to this, since there was nothing subtle about the points that they made regarding the president. When Stan calls President Garrison to ask for help in possibly stopping the pandemic, Garrison's response reveals that he's actively avoiding any solution to the problem, since his promise to, quote, get rid of the Mexicans is being fulfilled, as many of them are being killed by the pandemic. This active avoidance later evolves into active sabotage, in what was arguably the least subtle jab in the episode, when society's last hope for a possible vaccine is literally wiped away as President Garrison kills the pangolin with a flamethrower. The message is painfully clear: the president is actively destroying our country. While I do think it's a bit on the nose by South Park standards, I can still appreciate the comedy in it. To me, the comedy actually comes from the lack of subtlety. The creators are basically just coming out right and stating that the president's actions, or lack thereof, are wrong. This unexpected change in comedic style is ironically what makes it work. Finally, there's the way that Stan responds to the pandemic. Stan's response is likely the most relatable part of the episode, as throughout the episode he keeps trying to convince everyone that Butters isn't okay, that he's sick and he needs to go to Build-A-Bear because he needs to do something normal. It's revealed near the end of the episode in a monologue from Stan that it hasn't been about Butters, it's been him that has felt the need to do something normal. He's been losing his mind in lockdown and he just wants to feel like everything is normal for a moment. All he wants is his life back, how it was before the pandemic. A surprisingly heartfelt moment in which Stan even sheds a tear. This part of the episode hit hard since this is something everyone can relate to. Being in lockdown has been hard on everyone, and we all want nothing more than to return to normal life, or at least feel as though we're living normal lives, even if it is for a brief instance. Though this video is meant to be about how South Park has helped us laugh through the horrible events of this year, they also demonstrate an important point in this scene. That even though it's easier to distract yourself from these negative times, sometimes it's important to embrace the sadness that comes with these events. Even though we can laugh to avoid crying, the situation itself isn't a joke, and pretending it is to spare yourself from negative feelings affects everyone.
Now we have hope. We've learned that we might never get back to our old lives, but by working together, we just might find a new way to...
While watching this episode, I remember for a large portion of it thinking, I wonder when they're going to make fun of the police, because it couldn't have been a satire about 2020 without mentioning the police. When the school reveals its plans to reopen, it also revealed that the teachers have refused to return to school, citing their own safety. When a parent asks who will replace the teachers, they're informed that the teachers will be replaced by a group of people who are looking for work due to losing their jobs because of recent events. Upon hearing this, it became immediately clear where this was heading. Of course, the South Park police force takes over the school and are the new teachers. When Cartman is forced to return to school, he acts in the way that you would expect Cartman to act when being forced to do something that he doesn't want to do. He throws a massive tantrum. The police officers then attempt to de-escalate the situation in the only way they know how to de-escalate a situation, by threatening to pull their gun if Cartman doesn't calm down. When Cartman doesn't calm down, they draw their weapons and begin firing at the target. The target, of course, being Token. The jokes here once again aren't very subtle, obviously making fun of American police officers' proclivity to use excessive force, particularly towards the black population. After this, the school is put on lockdown, and the police officers tell the parents it was due to a COVID case within the school. When the kids find out that they're claiming it was a COVID case, they retort with the fact that it had nothing to do with COVID. They just shot him. To which the officers respond with a convoluted series of events that makes it technically COVID related. A subtle jab at the likely inflated numbers of COVID deaths due to the fact that anyone who dies that had COVID is counted as a COVID death, regardless of what actually caused them to die. I was surprised when I found out that many people missed this joke, since I found it to be a clever way to make the point.
Yes, due to COVID. If it weren't for COVID, all the previous teachers would have still been here, we wouldn't have been in the class, and nobody would have gotten shot. Therefore, the young man is in the hospital due to COVID.
It was COVID related.
Later, when riots break out due to the fighting between anti-maskers and mask wearers, the police are called in to handle it. They show up with the absolutely massive weapons and tanks and utilize the opportunity to use excessive force once again, this time on anyone even remotely involved in the protests. This is a classic example of the South Park writers using their favorite tool when satirizing something: hyperbole. As I mentioned in my other South Park video, the writers love to use hyperbole because it helps them make their point, but also removes the situation a degree from reality, making it easy to laugh at. By exaggerating the way the cops handle the riots, they can still make the point that the way the police have handled the riots and protests around the nation has been unnecessarily violent, but at the same time, they exaggerated enough to separate it a degree from reality, making a topic that otherwise wouldn't have been funny a topic that's easy to laugh at.
This might be our last chance at a job, so I don't want any unnecessary deaths. No unnecessary deaths.
If there's one thing South Park has gotten good at in the last couple of years, it's their ability to self-reflect. If you watched the last season, you'd know that Tegrity Farms, Randy's weed business, is often used as a metaphor for the show itself. In this episode, it's no different. From the beginning, Randy calls his new deal on his weed the Pandemic Special, the same name the creators gave to this episode in the advertising leading up to the release of the episode. Sharon hates the idea of a pandemic special, saying that no one needs a pandemic special right now, that people are out there dying, but all Randy cares about is this pandemic special. When Randy discovers that he is the cause for the pandemic, he begins to question the pandemic special, questioning the morality behind it. Sure, on one hand he's giving people an escape from the terribleness that is 2020, but at the same time he's profiting off of these horrible circumstances. Does the world really need a pandemic special? Even when a man comes up to him and tells him how the pandemic special has helped him through his tough circumstances, it only makes him more upset. He can't help but feel as though he's doing the wrong thing, profiting off of a disaster that's killed hundreds of thousands and changed the lives of so many. Whether he's helping the people or not, he feels guilty. This is clearly meant to be the show's creators speaking on this episode. They can't help but feel bad about creating an episode of South Park and profiting off of all the misfortunes these disasters have brought. Even though people need a good laugh right now, it's hard for them to not feel guilty about it. They're helping us laugh through the pain, but at what cost? Later, when Randy realizes his DNA may be the cure to COVID, he finds a way to get his DNA into the pandemic special. This, however, has an unexpected side effect. Anyone who partakes in the pandemic special now has Randy's signature mustache growing off their face. Thus, we are now able to see who is partaking in the pandemic special. Randy still feels bad about all that has happened, and finally, he decides he's going to tell Sharon everything. When he finds her in bed, he notices a mustache growing from her lip. Randy then realizes that even the people who hated the idea of the pandemic special the most were partaking in it. This leads Randy to a rather fitting conclusion.
I just think maybe I'm gonna do a few more specials. You got some shit on your face.
When watching the pandemic special, it's clear to see why it received the highest rating South Park has had in years. It's a perfect example of how effective South Park can be when the show is at its best. It made us laugh when life was anything but funny, and that's what's most important. The function of comedy is no different from any other form of entertainment, to help us forget about life for a little while, to remind us to keep our heads up when it seems like things are at their worst. The pandemic special is exactly what all of us needed right now, a reason to laugh when there are so many reasons to cry. And by providing us this reason, that is how South Park's pandemic special made us laugh through the pain.
Don't forget to get out and vote, everybody. Big election coming up.